How's it going, everybody? My name's Dave Whipple and you're watching Bush Radical. Welcome back to my series about off-grid homesteading in 2020. Today what we're going to be talking about is temporary living arrangements. You've got a piece of property, you want to put a cabin on it, you want to put a small log house, build a homestead up from the ground up, you want to do it out of pocket, you want to do it on the cheap. My advice is you definitely want to live on the property that you're going to be homesteading while you build. Gives you a million opportunities to get other things done. Clearing up all the area, burning up wood, getting the place dialed in. And when it comes to a temporary living arrangement, I don't think you can do better than a wall tent. During the building projects of the last 20 years, my wife and I have lived in a dome tent while we built a cabin. We lived in a cabin while we built a house. We've lived in a camper while we built a garage. We lived in a garage while we built a house. And on our last homestead project, we lived in a wall tent while we built our cabin. I have to say, of all the ways you can be set up with a temporary living arrangement while you build, the wall tent is my favorite. In this video, I'm going to show you guys what to look for in a wall tent, what to avoid in a wall tent. I'm also going to really dive into what the benefits of a wall tent are, as opposed to, let's say, a camper, as opposed to, let's say, a regular tent. Now, when it comes to things to look for and things to avoid in regards to wall tents, the first thing is color. You want a white wall tent with good, bright white canvas. The reason being is there's going to be so much natural light that gets through the canvas and through the rainfly that you're actually going to feel like you're not hemmed in a cave. The old green army tents and some of the canvas camping wall tents from the 70s are dark brown or olive drab, and it's like a cave inside. You don't want that. One of the things that makes or breaks a tent, in my opinion, is a good heavy zipper. There's so many tents out there that they basically have like a shoestring tie about every foot, and you tie the door closed. Now that might look interesting if you want a classic looking tent, but there's really no practical reason for it. You don't seal the door off well and you're constantly untying it and tying it back up. You want a good heavy zipper. Here's another thing you want to look for. You want to look for corners that are already reinforced. Now from the inside of this tent, take a look at that corner. Down on the other end, you can see that that corner is also reinforced. The ridge in the top of this wall tent is also reinforced. I've owned lots of wall tents over the years, and without that extra reinforcement in the corners, if you leave them up for a building season or a couple building seasons, which I have, just the wind and the natural movement of the tent itself, it tends to wear on the corners and you'll get thin spots in the canvas. Buy a tent that already has the corners reinforced. Another thing to keep in mind is windows. Now this tent has a window in every single wall, and that's very important because if your tent doesn't have windows, it's going to be the shortest amount of time before you wish it had. So buy a tent right from the get-go that has windows. Now another thing that's a must-have item in a wall tent is a bug screen. Basically on this tent, the whole end of the tent has a bug screen on the inside. So you could fold back both sides of the canvas door and you could basically sit there and have a complete view but still have that bug screen protection. This is another one of those areas where I don't know why there are tents out there that don't have bug screens, because I've never lived somewhere where I didn't want a bug screen at one point or another. Now it might be fine in the fall not to have one, but if you're building during the summertime and you're building during the spring, that bug screen is going to be worth its weight in gold. So I wouldn't look at a tent that didn't have one. This is what I would consider pretty much a typical setup for the inside of a wall tent. This particular model is a 12 by 14. You got a two-person bed, you got yourself a back window, you got yourself a table. Down here you have the wood stove. If you're not going to be using a tent like this daily, a nice chest to keep your bedding and stuff in, just in case you have mice in the area. This is one of the other great things about living in a wall tent. You can have a regular sized bed. Not a camper sized bed, not just a bed that's based on a cushion that would be a bench and then it folds down into a table. This is an actual bed. So you can be hanging out in an actual bed, somebody else can be at the table, somebody else can be at a chair by the stove, and pretty much everywhere that you walk in a wall tent like this, you've got all the room you need to stand up, and that's a big deal. Now a tent like this gives you plenty of room for storage, gives you lots of living room space. And one of the real benefits of having a wall tent, other than the fact that it's very much like living in a cabin, is the fact that it's heatable space. And you can heat your wall tent with a wood stove. What you want to look for whenever you're buying a wall tent is that it already has a pre-installed stove jack. Now if you buy a tent and it does not have a place for a wood stove pipe to pass through it, you can install what's called a stove jack. Some of the old tents, they have a two-part stove jack where you cut a hole out of the canvas and you sandwich this metal flange in. It's got kind of little metal tabs that lock it together, so it's an inside and an outside piece of metal that the stovepipe passes through. On this tent, it's a fireproof material that's very much like a welding blanket. Here you can see the wood stove that we have in this wall tent, and if you go up, you can see the stove jack where that stovepipe passes through the roof of the tent. One of the things I like the most about a wood stove and a wall tent setup is that when you're on a piece of property and you're building a cabin and you're cutting brush and you're cutting dead trees, having a wood stove and a wall tent gives you a place to put all that stuff. It's a very good relationship. But if you had a camper, you're going to be dealing with a propane furnace in a camper. You don't have anywhere to burn wood in a camper. In a wall tent, you're not going to be buying propane, you're going to be using wood that you're cutting anyway to heat your living space. Now there's 4 setup options with a tent like this. You can use an internal frame like this one has, and it sits on the exact footprint of the tent. You can also set your tent up like a lot of spike hunters do with a peeled pole frame, like you see here on this log raft. Now the other 2 variables that come into play with a wall tent, do you want to put it on the ground or do you want to put it on a platform? For homesteading purposes, I would say absolutely build a platform and put your wall tent on a platform. You're going to be spending a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months in that tent. On the ground is fine if you have a very flat, very smooth area. But a platform is a much better setup if you're going to be in it a long time and maybe your ground is a little bit unlevel or it's got some hills to it. Now this tent that Brooke and I currently own is set up on a platform. The platform is made out of old barn beams and rough sawn lumber. And if you look down here at the flooring, you can see we have this all-season patio carpet right over top of the rough boards. You can build your platform out of anything you want, but one thing I would say is make sure you screw all the parts together, don't nail them. Because when you're done, you're probably going to want to use that platform for some other project. A deck, a porch, maybe you want to use that lumber to build the floor for a small tool shed. Whatever it is, make sure you can take it apart and repurpose it if you're not going to leave the tent set up once your building project's done. Now let's imagine that you're going to set this tent up on the ground itself. You'd set the tent up just like you normally would, but you want some kind of a floor in it. Keep the damp down, you want to keep the bugs out of it. You want to make sure that whatever kind of a flooring you put in, if it's like a patio carpet, it's not wicking moisture up from the soil. So when you put your tent down, put down a tarp that's the same size footprint as your tent on the inside. And then you can roll your patio carpet out on it and you're pretty much good to go. My wife Brooke had this tent up in the Upper Peninsula, Michigan last year for a couple months, and she had it set up that way, right on the ground with a tarp underneath and then the patio carpet over top of it. It was fantastic. But we had a good flat piece of sandy ground. If you're on a little bit of an angle or if you're going to be there for a long time and you don't have great ground, put it on a platform. When you buy a wall tent, one of the options is generally a tarp type rainfly cover. This is an absolute must-have, especially if you're going to be leaving your tent up for months and months. You're going to see a lot of weather. Buying a tarp style fitted rainfly like this is probably the single best thing you can do to protect your investment in your wall tent. This is another thing I like. This particular tent has these sewn in D-bracket attachments, not only for the rainfly, but for the stake loops on the bottom of the tent. Now the thing I like about that is when you put in a sewn in D-bracket like that, you've got fabric that is whole and you're sewing it in, you're sewing in your attachment to that whole fabric. When you put in a grommet, you're cutting a hole out of the fabrics, so you've just breached all the integrity of the fabric and then you press the grommet in. I like this design better. I would look for sewn in tie points over grommets, my personal opinion. I spent 2 months in a wall tent on the Yukon River in 2014. Spent 5 months living in a wall tent in 2015. Another 5 months in 2016 and another 5 months in 2017. If you add that up with the time spent fishing out at our fish camp at Minto, where we had a wall tent, I've spent over 1.5 years of my life living in wall tents. This wall tent was made by a company called walltentshop.com. Now the reason this is the tent we currently have are all the things I've already covered in this video. It's also an American company owned by veterans, and you can call and talk to the people who own the place. If you're looking for a wall tent, I would definitely suggest these guys. Not only that, but they have the lowest prices on wall tents on the internet. They're doing everything that's important in a wall tent right up front. They're doing the extra corner reinforcement, they're doing the ridge pole reinforcement, they've got the sewn in tie points, a good heavy duty zipper, a storm flap. so you're not buying all this stuff as upgrades. Check them out. It's walltentshop.com. I'm going to put the link down below in the description. Tell them I sent you. Now that I've told you everything I love about a wall tent, what to look for and what to avoid when you're buying a wall tent, the wall tent company that I recommend, let me talk about why you should want a wall tent versus a camper. A camper is the first thing that comes to a lot of people's minds when they think about getting a temporary living arrangement set up while they build something else. Here's why I don't like campers. Well, for starters, living in a camper feels like you're existing in a hallway. Everything in most campers is built on this hallway mentality. Here's where you walk and here's the stuff off to the side. Also, a lot of campers have built-in closets, they have built-in storage, so you're stuck with whatever is already there. They also almost always come with a bathroom that's got a shower and a toilet. The shower is generally right over top of the toilet. Most people I know never use the shower in their camper. A lot of them don't use the toilet in their camper because they're at a campground where they've got outhouses. When you're on your own property and you're building, one of the first things you're going to want to do is you're going to want to build an outhouse anyway. The idea of having a camper and having that limited space that's dictated by the camper manufacturer. I've done it. I got through it, but I didn't enjoy it. I didn't feel like I was living very, very comfortably. I couldn't wait to get out of the camper. Having this table that you wedge into on the end, that every day you're folding it down for another bed. Every time you pass somebody in the hallway, you're literally just squeaking past them in this hallway area. What about a dome tent? Well, yeah, if you're super poor and you have a super high tolerance for suffering and misery, $100, and it's going to keep the rain off you. You're going to be able to put your junk in it. You know, that when it comes to living on your property while you build, there's pretty much endless possibilities. You could get a Shelter Logic style shelter, you could get a dome tent, you could get a pup tent, you could get a camper, you could buy one of those portable storage buildings. All of those are options. Now, the reason I made this video is because having done most of those things in the past, I think the wall tent is the best option when everything is considered. You've got a lot of space, it's nice and bright, it's heatable with wood, they have really good resale value. It's just a cheerful way to live. And you definitely want to live on your property. You don't want to rent and commute back and forth because you'll never get your project done. And you'll never get to move on to that new homestead. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. In the next installment of Off-Grid Homesteading in 2020, I'm going to go over the tools that you need to get not only your building project done, but also to set up your property. Don't forget to hit sub and like and hit the little bell to get updates when I post videos. Thank you guys so much for watching Bush Radical. My name's Dave Whipple. Be radical, eh? And we'll see you soon.